looks like Ariel Helwani is moving on from Vox Media and Spotify. He says, thank you for 3 incredible years, and now on to the next very exciting chapter. Well, the Spotify show on the Ringer MMA show that he did with Pizzi and Chuck Mindenhall, that's coming to a close, and his whole MMA hour with MMAfighting.com, that's all coming to a close. The big media shill, the UFC fighter, combatant guy who hates the UFC, the rat himself, is now leaving the mainstream media, the legacy media. I am interested to see what his next step is going to be. Is he moving to another mainstream legacy media outlet? That's my theory. He's probably going to another area. He's going to continue to shill and do what he does and lie and weasel his way around the MMA community. He's really, listen, I respect what Ariel has done in the MMA community, no doubt. He puts out some good interviews. He is a classically trained journalist and interviewer. He actually does his job. But media members like this and reporters and journalists like this do have to be a little bit weaselly at times. And so you'll remember there were multiple times where he got into it with Dana White at some press conferences where he was asking questions about Nick Diaz. That's the one that stands out to me. And how he's always just trying to poke the bear, you know? Like, there's nothing wrong with that as a media member. Let me talk about that for a minute. That is their job. The UFC has this iron dome around them where they're completely protected by themselves. They just have complete control over the media coverage they get. And what Ariel did was he came in and had some journalistic integrity, which is not normal morality integrity, but he was telling the stories that were true, whether you liked it or not. And he was poking the bear whether you liked it or not. He was asking the tough questions whether you like it or not. That needs to be in the media for sure. But mainstream legacy media likes to spin these stories, much like what we just saw at the UFC 305 press conference where Oscar Willis, one of these mainstream media guys, he comes in there, a UFC approved guy, and he starts spinning this story about how Israel was injured going into UFC 293, and that's the only reason why he lost. You have to learn how to read in between the lines. What is being said is not what is being promoted or portrayed in reality. You have to be able to read through the lines when it comes to legacy media, whether it's TV, news, Twitter, anything legacy media, mainstream media, big brands, big companies, multi-billion-dollar companies that are putting forth this stuff. Vox Media owned MMA Fighting. Spotify owns this Ringer show. They have this collaboration with other big mainstream companies. These companies that start to get into these billion-dollar things become corrupt. They start to spin their own narratives. They create stories out of nothing. You have to learn how to read in between the lines and get smarter. Read. Figure out what is being said. What's the truth of this? Where's the bias in this? Where, if I was writing this from a certain angle of whatever, how would I portray it? How would I put it forth to these people to try to basically propagandize things that are non-consequential in terms of the whole world? But they spin a narrative and they convince people to think a certain way, and I don't like that. And that Ariel has been a part of that for a long time. And that, even on his own, he does that, where he spins stories and manipulates other fighters, gets them to come on doing these interviews, and then he switches it up and he has them completely unprepared and they takes them off guard and they start having to answer these hard questions with dumb answers and they look silly and he looks like a genius and he does this whole 10-8 Helwani thing, and I just don't really like what Ariel has become over time. He used to be the hard question guy at the UFC, and I had respect for that. But the problem is, recently he's come out and he's trying to sell himself as the good guy. Media members are not the good guy. I know there's this guy, he's been on Fox Sports years ago, but Jason Whitlock, big guy, but he would always ask the hard questions, and a lot of people hate him for asking the hard questions. But he fully admits that that's part of the job, and sometimes you have to be a little slimy and a little weaselly. You try not to be. I think Jason Whitlock is a guy who's pretty nice overall. He's got some good morals. Ariel's probably a nice guy-ish who's got decent morals, but he does everything for clicks. You get to a certain size and a certain viewership level that you just do everything for clicks, and that's what we don't like, and that's why Twitter and the rise of social media content creators, much like Lucas Tracy, there's James Lynch out there, Jesse on Fire, MMA Guru, like these guys have come up because they're mostly honest. Do they take a comedic angle to things, to the blasphemize and take things to the next level, hyperbolize everything, maybe to some extent to get some extra views. Yes, I did this in my first video ever about Bilal Muhammad. Listen, that's content creation, but people are starting to find other content creators that tell the truth, and that's what people are really looking for. In this age of social media where everything tries to hyperbolize everything and lie and spin stories and the whole clickbait thing, like Bisping and DC and Chael Sonnen, for example, they have these clickbait titles, and then they get into the video and it's not so clickbaity, it's very middle of the road, not taking a hard stance one way or the other about a fighter. And people just don't like that. They don't like dishonesty. And what people are gravitating towards is smaller content creators who tell the truth and tell it how it is. If you agree with that person's opinions, you start to watch them and you take different aspects of what they may or may not disagree or agree with you on, and they run with it, but they're telling the truth. You can tell they're coming from a good place and they're telling the truth and trying to tell the story the way it's supposed to be told. Ariel does not always do this. He's not the good guy in every situation. You are a journalist. You're supposed to look bad sometimes, dude. You don't look perfect. You're not this perfect white knight. You look at Batman and how he was the Dark Knight because Harvey Dent was supposed to be the white knight, the protector, this and that. The guys that are in journalism that ask the hard questions and are hated by the masses. But they get out these interviews and they're supposed to tell the truth. And that's what Ariel used to do. And now he's not doing that. And I don't respect that anymore. So I don't really care what happens to him. I think it'd be funny if he gets into, goes off on his own and does individual stuff. I think that's respectable that you would go off and do your own thing after years of being with big companies. I do respect that. I would respect that, but I don't think that he's going to have the same following that he does. We see guys like Luke Thomas, who has more YouTube subscribers than MMA Guru, for example, but he gets fractions of the views that MMA Guru or Lucas Tracy gets on MMA YouTube. So, what does this mean? I'm interested to see what he does. He's a big player. He's really made a name for himself in the MMA community. But if Ariel just disappeared from the face of MMA, frankly, I wouldn't really care. Like, good riddance, bro. We don't appreciate the real fans that are really interested in the sport and really like the sport, don't want anything to do with legacy media and what they've done with the NFL and the NBA and how they spin stuff and make up these narratives, and they just get all the airtime for BS when you really want to hear great stories about how Tom Aspinall has a big family and they're overcoming these issues, and Francis Ngannou's coming over these issues. We don't want to hear about Francis being this, spinning this race narrative. We just want to hear Francis's story. We want to hear Themba Garimbo's story. We want to hear Abdul Razak Hassan's story and what other guys have gone through to get to this point. People like inspiring stories. People like fighters coming from poverty, stricken with poverty, and then rising to these great heights. That's what we want to see. We don't need to see all this BS about the inequality and the victim narratives. Like, I've never heard Francis once talk about how he's a victim of his situation. He took a stand and he made his life better by working his ass off and working harder than anybody who has ever worked in MMA. That's how he got to where he was at. Not because he's a victim, not because, I'm oppressed. No. You got to break the stereotypes and make something for your life. If you want to be successful in life, you go and do something. And Ariel is the exact opposite. He's always crying about something, always bitching about something. He's not the hero in every story. Sometimes you got to play the bad guy, and that's okay. Just admit it, man. But it is what it is. Good luck to Ariel in his next thing. I have no personal hard feelings for this guy. I just don't like how he's been running business the last couple of years. So we'll see what Ariel Helwani has next for his career.